Object settings is where we start to get into the heart of this product. And first, I'm going to leave the object type set to Potterware object, which is the kind of object that you can make in Potterware. We're going to just focus on the Potterware object and begin with layer height. So layer height has a lot to do with how thick or thin you want the layers to be on your object. You can see if I change the layer height that I'm going to have a looser coil, and that would result in many different effects depending on what kind of nozzle I have on my printer. I tend to rarely go above 2, but if I were using a larger millimeter nozzle, I would want to go above 2 to get a looser look. How you compress your layers is often critical to what kind of model you're printing. And as we get into more of the design aspects of the program, I will address that. I often just leave this at 2 or under 2, 1.8, 1.7. Now, the object height is how big this is going to be. If I wanted, for example, to make a plate, let's say I just want the rim of the plate to be 1 inch high. I would put in 25 here for the height of my object. And then all of these settings are going to remain on the profile, but they'll be really compressed. So this is only 1 inch high. Let's say that I wanted to make an 8-inch plate. What would I do? I would think about changing my profile. This would affect the diameter. So 8 inches is roughly, it's a little bit over 200, but let's just put 200 in here. I would put 200 in every one of these settings, and that would give me a straight edge, and it would also widen the shape. So I'm going to get this all typed in. As I zoom out of the object, you'll now see that I have a much wider diameter. This currently has no bottom, and we are going to set the bottom in the base settings when we get there. If I wanted to have this be a plate, for example, I would give it base layers. So I typically like to put in 2 layers, and you'll see that the bottom is going to be solid if I do this. How loose or how tight those weaves are of that coil is adjusted with the base layer settings, but I'm going to do a whole video on base settings. So let's go back to object settings. I just wanted to explain how you might go about making a plate. Let's say that I want to make a cup. Then I might go back to maybe the default settings. And one way that I like to get to the default settings is to just simply reload my page, and it reloads all of Potterware, and then I can come back to the object settings and you'll see it's returning to its defaults. So for now, I'm going to leave it at 1.4 layer height, 85 object height, and we're going to look at sides. Sides is set currently to 100, which gives it a really smooth effect as if this is a perfect circle, but it's actually made up of 100 little lines that make it look circular. And you would rarely need to go above 100, but if you're working with larger objects, let's say you're going above 10 inches or so, I might set this to be even higher resolution. Unless you are intentionally going for a low polygon effect, which I actually love. And also you can make some different shapes. For example, I could make a hexagon if I changed this to 5. And it's not that obviously a 5-sided object because we have a smooth profile turned on. If I change this to an angular profile, you're really going to see the effect of having changed this to have only 5 sides. If I put in 4 sides, I'm going to get a box. Okay, another thing that's happening here, another spot where I can change the type of profile, is it's currently set to smooth. I'm going to put this to angular as well. And then we're going to really see the effects of the two angular profiles here. So if you're going for subtle, you can try putting a curve into or smooth into either of these settings. But if you're going for something more geometric, putting angular in the horizontal and the vertical profile is going to give you a really beautiful angular object here. I'm going to go back to the setting of 5 so that we can see what the hexagon looks like. And if I, do 6, I think you really see these very angular effects all the way up to about 10 on your object sides. Now, what's neat about getting these angular effects is if you want to then twist your object, I might make it a little taller just so that this is more visible. I'm going to type in 150, which is going to make it about 6 inches tall. And again, I'm just using the 25 to divide by for my calculation of converting inches to millimeters. Now if I give this object a twist, you're going to see a very dramatic effect. If I were to change the profile back to smooth, you can play between changing the vertical and the horizontal profiles, and you just get a much more subtle effect, which is also very beautiful. I'm going to change this one to smooth, and we'll still see the twist, but it's just going to be very subtle and beautiful. This is where it helps to zoom in a little bit, and also where, the experience of actually printing makes a difference, because there is definitely some shadow in here showing the subtlety of this beautiful shape, and sometimes the subtle shapes are so gorgeous when they print. I don't mind them at all. Next we're going to look at scaling options, but I think I'm going to put this back to angular so that we get a more dramatic effect. And there are two kinds of scaling. There's uniform scaling. So by this saying 1, it indicates that the way you scale is by adding numbers to the 1. So I believe it's going to go in increments. So this would be doubling the size, close to doubling, 1.99. And it will be uniform, so it will be all over the entire vessel. Or you could choose non-uniform scaling, and I believe this is going to pop back. We shall see. Yep, pops back to its original size. And so now if I only wanted to scale along the X, I can get some really interesting shapes. I love to use these non-uniform scaling effects. You can make some very interesting kinds of shapes and objects. I mean, I wouldn't have expected that. This is a very interesting shape. I would love to print this. And if I thought that it was too dramatic, I might take some of that twist off. This is where the creativity and exploration and experimentation happens. Sometimes I just type numbers in here because it's a little tricky to get the slider to go where you might want it to go. But a 50 twist should be more subtle, but yes, it is. And even this is really a spectacular piece, I think. So you have the non-uniform scaling and you have the uniform scaling, and then the last thing that you have is scale to length. And this is where I don't ever use this, but I assume that if I had a very specific size that I wanted, so these are all the scales to length. So this is in millimeters. Right now it's changed my entire object to being, you know, really different. It's just all trying to be 100 millimeters all the way around, which would be like a little 2-inch by 2-inch by 2-inch object. But let's say that I wanted this to be taller. You know, I could move the Z, and if I put this to be 300 high, it's going to be really skinny and very tall. So lots of great exploration in here. For now, that is a really good look at the Potterware object settings.